I'm back with Danielle D'Souza Gill, author of The Choice, The Abortion Divide in America, a book that you should get if you want to learn about this very important issue. We're talking about the Supreme Court hearing yesterday. Danielle, I was kind of laughing when we were talking about this because you were actually saying that you enjoyed the legal give and take of the debate, but in some ways you were dealing with lawyers who didn't know all that much about the abortion issue itself. Let's start by talking a little bit about Scott Stewart, the Mississippi Solicitor General, arguing, you may say, on the pro-life side. Give me a sense of what he was like and perhaps how he contrasts with Julie Reichelman, who was arguing on behalf of the clinic, or Elizabeth Preligar, representing the Biden administration, the U.S. Solicitor General. What was the difference in strategy or tone between the two sides?
I think Stewart seemed like he wasn't exactly sure of things. He seemed a lot more deferential to the court, but also when he was asked questions, sometimes he would not exactly know what to say. One example is when he was asked about whether or not this is a religious argument. Are there secular people? He was asked directly who are pro-life, and he didn't name anyone in response to that. That's not to say that he didn't do a good job in especially the legal side of things, but I think he was definitely less of a abortion aficionado when it comes to the interworkings of this debate. Whereas the woman on the other side, she was very much speaking as though, kind of in Jen Psaki's style, as though everything she was saying was fact, everything she was saying was true. She talked down to the justices much more, so correcting them even at times. And so I think that their strategy was quite different.
I mean, you said at one point, not only in the context of what you just mentioned, but also in the context of the issue of fetal pain, which is an issue that came up in the Sotomayor part of the conversation. That, I mean, this is stuff that you've been researching now for well over a year. You've been talking about it. There are studies that you could be cited to talk about all this. Now, this was not at the lawyer's disposal, but you're saying this evidence was at hand. It's almost like you felt like, you know, I'd like to run in there and kind of make a contribution to this debate. Talk a little bit about the fact that very often in a legal case, factual questions and academic questions arise that fall outside the legal orbit, but that are right up your alley.
Exactly. I think that if you're going to be the person who goes before the Supreme Court on this topic, it's of course important that you are one of the best lawyers, which I'm sure he is, but also to be really knowledgeable about the actual debate itself, because a lot of questions that he was asked weren't necessarily legal questions about precedent or about things like that. But as you mentioned with Sotomayor, he was asked questions like, well, what about fetal pain? And what about he was even asked what would happen to the state of the court if this was overturned? How would this be viewed? Would this be seen as political? So obviously, these are questions that people discuss outside of the realm of law expertise. So it wasn't just a discussion of stare decisis or things like that, but really questions about, well, what happens to the woman if she's in the situation? And these other questions more about, I guess, changing the hearts and minds of the justices in a practical sense, not based on the Constitution.
If somebody had asked you in that direct context, is abortion a religious issue, yes or no, what would you have answered?
I would have answered no, because I think that actually if someone on the left or is arguing that it is, they're basically saying that people who are not religious cannot be good people. So I would say that people who are not religious, of course, can be good people, because we all have the ability to have empathy for others. We all have a conscience, assuming that we don't have sociopathic tendencies. We can all empathize with the child in the womb. So to say that only religious people can do this, I think is in a way giving too much credit, perhaps, to those who are religious. And also, I would point to the atheist Christopher Hitchens, who was one of the most prominent atheists, who was actually pro-life, and he was very much in favor of that. As a materialist, he discussed how he believed in pure annihilation, which means that after death, there is nothing else. That is the end. And since he believed this is our only life to live, it is really the worst crime of all to take away that one life. And oddly enough, if you are religious and believe in an afterlife, you might have the consolation of thinking these children go somewhere after death, but he did not have that consolation.
You know, one thing I found really striking, and we'll close on this, is the fact that the left in this case didn't try to explicitly defend abortion. They were defending the idea of respecting precedent. Sotomayor's main argument was that if the court overturns Roe, it, quote, won't survive the stench of being thought of as political. So let me ask you, what about this idea that somehow to overturn Roe is political, but to keep Roe the way it is, quote, not political, and therefore preserves the credibility of the court itself?
Yes, that's one thing I would have said if I were Stewart as well, which is that she said, how can the court survive if we overturn this? Well, I would say, how can the court survive if we don't overturn this? Because right now we've been living under Roe v. Wade for 50 years and have experienced the harm, the pain, the 61 million deaths of these children. We've seen so many people horrified from abortion. So we've gotten to see what has been the effect of this. Has it been something that's safe, legal, and rare as it was explained 50 years ago? Or has it become something that's really been a bane on our society? And so I think that her saying that made it almost like a threat, as if this is overturned, the left is no longer going to support the court, the left will move to packing the court. And then I would say, well, why do you never assume that of the other side? Why do you never assume that of those of us who believe that you cannot kill an innocent baby? And I actually remember hearing the pro-choice lawyer say the word baby. She referred to it as a baby. And so I think that we all know this is a baby. So why that would outrage only the left, but in being in this situation would not outrage those of us who are pro-life, I think is an assumption that is rooted in the fact that the left oftentimes acts like, these gangsterized politicians, whereas we often do not, even though this is an issue that is so dire.
Terrific, Danielle. Let's, have you back to talk a little bit more about what will happen post-Roe, if there is, in fact, an overturning of Roe, what the pro-life movement needs to do. Thanks very much for coming on. We'll have more of this down the road.
Thank you.